Yeah, I think the music industry is a really interesting hotbed of neurodivergent traits. I would argue that perhaps it's a career choice where almost you are expected to cultivate neurodivergent traits in order to succeed. Being in that industry, I think one of the reasons I was able to get away with not knowing who I was for so long was that I was always surrounded by people that were functioning in this way that was natural for me, that those neurodivergent traits really found a home in the music industry.
Welcome to Beyond Distracted, where we talk with successful people with ADHD, explore the highs and lows of their journey, and learn the creative and insightful ways they live their lives in a neurodiverse-friendly way. My name is Anthony Brown.
And my name is 𝐁𝐞𝐲𝐬𝐬, and we're psychologists with ADHD. We hope our episodes are entertaining and change the conversation around ADHD, but it's no substitute for the real thing. So for personal support, we recommend getting help from a qualified mental health professional.
Matt Bartsch is a twice ARIA-nominated pianist, composer, and producer from Melbourne. Her music is gentle and emotive, and blends neoclassical jazz and ambient sounds that are really just very worth listening to. Her work is listened to all over the world and often gives insight into very deeply personal moments that many of us can relate to. Matt is proudly neurodivergent. She sees her neurodiversity as central to her creativity, shaping both her sound and the soothing effect her music has for many listeners. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's wonderful to be on the podcast.
Yeah, great. So when did you realize that your brain worked differently?
I feel like I always knew something was different. Even when I was a kid, just the way I would go about learning things or the way I'd interact with others, I always felt like a bit of a fish out of water. And there were things in my life that seemed incredibly easy and would sort of happen in a very effortless way. But then there are other things that were just perpetually incredibly difficult, and I could never really understand why it seemed to be so easy for other people and not for me.
Yeah.
But I think, I more formally discovered my true self, like a lot of women in my late 30s. So, during the pandemic, when you're locked at home and all the systems and routines are out the window and you're in a high stress environment, and you start looking at yourself and then going, maybe there's something to this idea of autism and ADHD that I need to investigate. And so, yes, I found out I was AuDHD, around about 3 or 4 years ago. And the revelations just keep coming from there.
Yeah. And a lot of those revelations been like for you. Like it can be quite a journey, right?
For me, it was just the most positive experience because, prior to having that knowledge about myself, I was trying to kind of solve all these problems in the way that I lived my life. And the solutions I was trying to go for weren't actually making any difference, because if you don't have those diagnoses, but you have accessibility needs or areas of your life where you need support, there's other words that get put in that place. For me, I was in my 20s and 30s, being treated for depression and anxiety and mood disorders and stuff. And these are all, in a way, I almost see them as placeholder words that were there
Yeah.
until the moment that I discovered my sort of true neurodivergence and then started to tackle a lot of the issues I had in a framework that is suitable for an autistic person or an ADHD person. And then all of a sudden started to just get such a vastly better quality of life. My work improved, my family life improved, my sense of who I am in the world was better. So for me, that, it was just such a wonderful thing. And whenever anyone tells me that they've been diagnosed as ADHD or autistic, I always say congratulations. And I know that that's kind of a bit of a privileged thing to be able to say, because that implies that it's a wholly positive thing. And I know that often there's also a lot of grief and a lot of things to work through, and a lot of problems that have probably arisen that led you to get the diagnosis. And really, it's only when our support needs are met that our talents and abilities can thrive. But I still think it's worth congratulating when you finally get to know who you are. I think that's a great thing, no matter what.
Right.
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely. Nat, I say the same thing. And I don't think it does negate the fact that there are challenges and a lot of different experience that leads to the diagnosis. But I
Yeah,
think it's wonderful. It's the beginning of something. And
yeah,
that might be a lot of positive experience, and it might also be grief and adjustment and a whole range of things. But congratulations. Absolutely. What a wondrous thing to just have the pieces fit and understand and then have that as the way forward,
yeah,
or from the place from which you move forward.
yeah,
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 yeah, totally. I know for myself, like I tend to like say welcome to people. Like, I'm like, welcome to it. Like, it's a similar sort of thing, right? Like, because it is like, it's so nice to just know who you are, like part of how you work, and that's a great thing. But also to just know you're not alone, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like it, yeah. I think I've had many conversations with people who are about to get assessed, because then it's like, I guess that just means all these issues I'm having are like my fault, or there's some there's still no like normal answer for it. And
Yeah.
yes, that is a really challenging headspace to be in when you're seeking the answers and you haven't yet got them. But yeah, one of the most beautiful things about it, I think, is yeah, realizing you're not alone in these. Is like, this is a well-worn path that many people throughout history have walked, with or without the knowledge about themselves. And yeah, you're really not the only person who has an inbox that looks the way yours does, or a bedroom floor that looks as bad as mine.
Yeah.
Totally, in
Yeah,
good company.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
definitely. And I guess, like, as a musician, like, how have you been able to lean into the differences on how your brain works as a musician?
Yeah, I think the music industry is a really interesting hotbed of neurodivergent traits. I would argue that perhaps it's a career choice where almost you are expected to cultivate neurodivergent traits in order to succeed. So even if you weren't a person with an ADHD brain or an autistic brain or any other kind of neurodivergence, you are probably going to have to sort of train yourself up to function in that kind of way, because you've got, periods of time where you have to work intensely on a creative project. You have to, think in an entrepreneurial way. You have to, network and be highly social with others. And, have that attention to detail and hyper focus on tiny things. Like if you're a classical musician, you would genuinely expected to be practicing, minimum, I don't think it's something like 4 hours a day. And often that might
Mm.
be on like 4 to 6 bars of music that you might
Wow.
and
Wow.
I come from the jazz scene, which is a little different. But yeah, so imagine if you weren't a neurodivergent person and you had to do that, and that's probably going to be harder than it is for someone
Sure.
who's immersed in their special interest or their hyper focused area, that and you get into that flow state where time stops. So I guess for me, being in that industry, I think one of the reasons I was able to get away with not knowing who I was for so long was that I was always surrounded by people that were functioning in this way that was natural for me. That those neurodivergent traits really found a home in the music industry. And a lot of us are getting diagnoses of autism or ADHD at this point, but also there are a lot that self-identify in some way, but don't feel as much motivation to necessarily even explore a diagnosis. And a lot of the reason for that is probably that they're in a working environment and in a community where those needs actually can sometimes be quite well met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting pocket. But for me, I found that there were some real disabling parts of my neurodiversity that were getting in the way of me doing my work up until the moment that I knew what those needs were and how to meet them. I have a very unusual experience of my mental health really improving when I became a mother. And I think that's because in those years prior to that, the music industry is so fluctuating in its workload. So you have like a period of time where you might be on tour and you're getting very little sleep and you're doing these like high dopamine experiences and, living life. It's like the best part of being a musician. But then you come home and then you might not have anything in the diary for 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
you've just got to do all the boring things like put the bins out and, hang the washing on the line. And then you're struggling to do those things. And all of a sudden, when I had a baby, there was this routine to my life that it became the closest I'd had to a 9-to-5 job. And the autistic part of me, I think, really thrived with having a bit of repetition and routine. And then actually, I think my music career and my creative output improved that time. So, yeah, my relationship with my neurodiversity and my music career is a really interesting one because I don't think I would have had the career I've had so far if it wasn't for having uniquely neurodivergent traits and things that have been really innate and I haven't had to teach myself. And that's something I'm really proud of. And now it's about patching the hole.
When you talk about what are some of those things that you might still be figuring out?
Yeah. I guess with all small businesses, you suddenly realize there's all these things you didn't learn when you were training. So I'm assuming this is the same for psychologists starting their own clinic or an AFL player who's reaching retirement or whatever. That there are these people that train in like a very specific area, but then out in the real world, there's all these other adjacent skills. And in the music industry, I think a lot of music degrees are slowly starting to incorporate a bit more of these things like marketing, business. Unfortunately, in the sort of elite training institutions like the conservatorium model, there's really nowhere near enough emphasis placed on teaching us those skills. So you can have someone who comes out of those courses and they're just able to perform at the absolute world leading level, but they don't know how to send an invoice yet, or what you do to start a website, or how to get people to come to a concert that you might put on. And so,
Yeah.
for me, I'm now 18 years into running my career, and I've started a record label, as well as working as a performer and composer and producer. And every single one of those hats involves a huge amount of subtasks. And I think the biggest challenge I have is in trying to create a neuro-affirming working environment where I can just let myself just stay in one lane and just do one thing. Because the industry kind of expects a certain level of, fluidity with your responses to emails or how regularly you might post on social media, or there's all these things that just kind of come and go all the time. But I realized the more I have a day where I'm trying to compose a piece of music and also do a social media post or shoot off an email reply or write a grant application or whatever it might be, the more I layer those extra tasks on top of being creative, the more dysregulated and the more I will struggle. And, my entire nervous system will let me know. I live with chronic pain, POTS, and all these other associated issues that, I'm in that phase now where my body and my brain will tell me when I'm stressed. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like trying to be a good boss for myself and stop being a people pleaser and a masker and trying to do the perfect thing for everyone all the time. I had to learn to be okay with being that person that doesn't reply for a little while, or that the person that says no to something, which actually is very hard to do. But
It can be.
Oh, I think it's incredibly hard to do. That's right. And it's liberating to come to a place where you think, oh, I can actually say no, and the world doesn't stop spinning, and and
Yeah.
it's okay. But like it's so interesting to hear you explain that, Nat, because you're absolutely right. Psychologists don't learn how to run a business. And we were just reflecting on this earlier today, that idea that, ADHD brains in particular do love the autonomy of running your own business, is so entrepreneurial. But
Yeah.
that idea of all the executive functioning demands of running your own business and the skills that you have to learn and administration and all of these things that have time limits and deadlines, it seems like a good idea at the time, but it is incredibly taxing. It
Yeah,
it
Yeah,
takes time.
it is.
definitely.
And I think the music industry is a really tough one because unless you manage to, say you're a classical musician, there's a very, very small chance that you might end up getting offered a permanent part-time or full-time role with an orchestra, in which case you're, getting to make music every day as an employee. But probably 95%, I'm totally guessing here, but I'm guessing it's about 95% of people who embark on a music career are going to be doing that in a freelance capacity. And I think based on my experience, but also mentoring lots of young artists, I think that the biggest risk zone for neurodivergent musicians and their mental health is in that period of time after they leave the structure of a training institution like a gig, and then they're all of a sudden out on their own. They have an ABN. They're trying to do freelance work, and all of a sudden are faced with this huge list of skills that they need to learn on their own without support in order to build a career. And yeah, it's a really tricky time for a lot of us folks, I think.
Yeah.
Time it will get better though.
Well, just to add to your plate, Nat, I think there's a business idea right there.
Well,
That's it's business coaching for musicians. I'd love to talk to you more about it after the
well,
podcast.
actually, I do mentoring through my record label.
Yeah,
There you go.
It includes
great,
things like that. But what I would really love to
fantastic.
do is somehow compel those, major
Mm.
institutions to actually offer this stuff, not as an elective subject, because kids will never think that they need to know this stuff until they're older. But
Yeah.
but something that's actually compulsory, where they have to walk out with enough skills to be able to survive in those first 5 years.
Yeah, if only in like university they'd spent like an hour telling me how to do my BAS statements.
Exactly.
Would like save me so much stress and time in my life, right? Like it'd be
I would have
great.
taken a 5-minute lesson that let me know I had to do bass. That would have just been like, just knowing that would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly. And I think there's the music industry and the business world is also very complicated and fragmented, and there's lots of different tiny royalty income streams, and um, it's it is actually very hard, even for someone who has a music business degree. It's very hard to keep up with, and I think musicians often sort of you can hear this rhetoric that people go, "Oh, I'm just not really good at that stuff." I'm a creative person. That's just too complicated for me to understand. But the sad reality is that that's how we end up with musicians that, are exploited a lot with contracts and things that are taking away rights that they shouldn't be sharing. There's all this lost opportunity to earn income and build a career because they've never had that confidence and support to learn what they need to learn. And that's especially true for the neurodivergent musicians amongst us here.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I'm really curious. Like, in the music industry, what do people get wrong about neurodiversity? Like,
Great question. Well, I think it's a very fragmented, unregulated industry. It very much suffers from the show must go on mentality. That idea that even if you're incredibly unwell, you're still kind of expected to just go on stage. That part of that comes from the difficulties that are associated with making original music. Like if I'm playing a concert of my compositions, and I'm sick, no one can walk on stage and replace me. The only thing that could happen is that show is cancelled and the ticket holders are refunded, which means I don't earn money, but neither does the venue, neither do my on-stage musicians necessarily. And so that is a really huge thing to do. And so you will often try and find ways to still make something work, even if you're not in a good place to be performing. But I also think underneath that, there's always been this culture of like that showbiz, that you're just going to, tape up the ankle and go on stage and still do the dances. And because it's such a cutthroat industry and people, even if there is an understudy in the wings, you sort of never really encouraged to self-advocate for your well-being like that, because it's just incredibly hard to build a career. So that's a very, very toxic thing for neurodivergent people, because those days where you're not really at your best, there's often no escape from that. I've been like in the middle of incredible autistic burnouts, or having a meltdown, or shut down, and being in a tour van with a band in the middle of nowhere, and there's no escape, and there's never, other than perhaps your major productions where you might have an understudy for the lead roles. Most of the time, there's no one that can do what you do in that moment, and you are kind of stuck. So that's one thing. And the other thing I think is that it's because it's an unregulated industry. There's very unusual things like alcohol in the workplace, like. And so there's a lot of self-medicating that happens, and there's, I guess, almost this assumption that people, because everyone sort of has some neurodivergent traits of some kind, whether it's because they've taught themselves to do it to be a musician, or whether they actually are neurodivergent. There's a lot of kind of, I don't know, looseness about what that means. So if someone comes and says, I have this accessibility need and I need support, you can often be met with things like, well, everybody has that problem. And it's like, no, well, no, firstly, like, not everybody has the problem to this extent that needs support. It's the blessing and the curse of being surrounded by like-minded folks, is it does give a sense that, it's not as much of a disabling thing.
Yeah.
Because every person's different, and everybody has a different set of, unique needs and talents. And, you might get someone that plays in an orchestra and there's so much routine and structure around working in that environment that their neurodivergent needs are met. And so when someone else comes in and says, I need, a visual story of what the rehearsal is going to be like, or what backstage might look like, there might be people who are running that rehearsal or that concert that are thinking, well, that seems a bit extreme. But that's actually because most of the time they've got these people working in that environment where their needs have been automatically met. So it's a tricky thing to get right. And there's no HR department in the music industry, really.
No, and like, HR, like, may get a bad rap sometimes, but can be really, really handy, right? Because, like, it kind of sounds like, and I might have this wrong, I'd be interested in your thoughts, like, it's almost like neurodiversity is normalized, but it's not really accepted. Like, it's kind of expected that you have these traits, but they don't really accommodate for it as much.
No. And I find that especially as a female in the music industry, where women are sort of often innately feeling like you need to be extra good at everything in order to be taken seriously, particularly in things like, being a producer or a band leader. So that carries also a whole bunch of reasons why one might not speak up and say, actually, I would love some support with these things, or, disclosing that you're going to have difficulties arriving on time to a rehearsal or something like that. That it doesn't often feel like a safe industry to do that. And over time, now that I'm getting a little bit more established as an artist, I'm starting to get a little bit more confident in asking for some access needs in certain circumstances. But I still, don't feel consistently confident in doing that. And and because you'll never know, if you never get a gig again at a venue, you don't know whether that's because you asked for some accessibility needs to be met, or is it just that, your music was not their preferred choice of music, because it's such a subjective thing. So there's so many grey areas and things that feel a little murky and unregulated.
Wondering if you or your child might have ADHD? Having a clear understanding can make all the difference. ADHD Therapy Australia provides comprehensive telehealth ADHD assessments for adults and children over 12 years old. No matter where you are in Australia, our psychologists provide a clear, step-by-step process, prioritising accessible and affordable assessments. For more information, visit adhdtherapy.com.au.
Yeah, which is tricky space to navigate. I kind of wonder, like, if you had a chance to, like, say to, like, music organizations or venues, like, how to support people, like, who are neurodiverse and get it right. Like, I don't know. Do you have any ideas of what you'd say?
If I was running a venue, I would firstly make it just completely normal to be asking every artist or worker what their accessibility needs are. So if you think about in the music industry, we're often asked to submit as like a tech rider. So that's like a list of the different musical equipment that you might need on stage in order to play at a festival, for example. You might also get asked about a hospitality rider, and that's where you get those there's those funny ones on the internet that rock stars have made that have things like, the whole bowl of green M&Ms and things like that. Which I would argue a lot of that is coming from some sort of neurodivergent need.
Sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But everybody looks at that as kind of diva behavior
Yeah.
and, tantrums rather than meltdowns. And so I think that's a whole world you can unpack. But there's another type of rider, which is an access rider, which is just, a really simple document that says, I have a disability of some kind. Don't even need to say what it is. And these are the accessibility needs that I also need provided. So it's not just like your cheese platter and your bottle of red wine or the car amp on stage, but it might be also, a way to elevate your feet backstage, or, set like that you have a dressing room that's actually in a quieter area, or that it's got, lower lighting in that room, or you've got pictures of the backstage areas that are sent to your inbox before you get to the venue. All those little bits and pieces that help. And so I think if I could do anything like that in the future, I would just make it normal to ask people to send that, because it's very scary to send a document like that unsolicited to a venue or promoter,
Yeah.
or orchestra manager that you might be working with, when they haven't asked for it, because you're never sure how that will be received. Whereas if it becomes just a normal part of the process, then it normalizes having those needs and trying to have them met. So that's
And we're talking about reasonable adjustments here, like surely it's easier to arrange low lighting than it is a bowl of green M&Ms. Like you think about some of the requests that might be made in these venues, and you're not.
yeah.
I can't. I mean, right now I can't even think about what the reluctance would be. The way you explain it, it just seems so simple and straightforward. But if there were reluctance, maybe it's just this misconception that, oh, it's going to be this and it's going to be that and it's going to be time consuming and expensive and we're not going to be able to meet the need or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Think about what are some of what are some of the things that are asked through the existing channels.
Yes.
That might be sideways, sort of trying to have those needs met anyway, but without just it being in the open, or that they might be obscure and more difficult as they are now.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think for
Yeah.
those artists that are in that very privileged position of literally being able to put anything on a piece of paper, and like say you're Taylor Swift and
Yeah.
during someone's probably buying a couch in a particular color to have in your dressing room, you know. So
Yeah.
like there's a lot of I guess in that elite world of those highly successful artists, you know, people will do all sorts of things, and that the cliche of that green M&Ms bowl is, some people's theory is that those types of things exist on a rider as a way of testing whether the venue has paid attention to goods to be supplied. So whether that's true or whether that person just needs the sensory stim of just like a uniform
Yeah.
color.
Yeah.
I mean, how is it different to the risotto I might make with all green vegetables after a gig that really regulates me, you know?
Mm.
It's just the difference
100%.
comes from a different culture where it's,
Mm.
pop stars trying to kind of live the high life.
Yeah.
Whereas I try and challenge people to think about if you were looking at those sorts of behaviors in a neurodivergent framework, that's a very different thing. We're looking at, safe foods and things like that.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's that sort of misattribution, right? It's diva behavior
Yeah,
rather than regulating behavior, or it's a tantrum rather than a meltdown.
yeah,
And it's like if you gave people an opportunity to just be open about getting those needs met,
yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah, and you can see it happen in different ways. Like now we would get invited to share what our pronouns might be when we're filling in a form before we perform. So I feel like, the mechanisms are there to invite people to share what needs they might have, but it's not consistent and, what is I think a lot of the time venues are a little scared about accessibility because they're worried about not getting it right. Because if they can't meet every access need, then then they'll just try and not deal with the topic really that at all.
Mm.
But I think perfect is the enemy of good. I would
Yeah.
rather have someone ask and then respond with, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't get you that quiet space. We've only got one room backstage." But that's a great moment to have that conversation about what other things we could organize. Like, "Oh, great. Thanks for letting me know. I'll bring some ear defender, earmuffs
Yeah.
Yeah.
where I'm prepared and I still know." But that I think sometimes in the arts, especially where there's people struggle to get tickets sold in venues and everyone's in a very high stress environment a lot of the time. These types of things are fairly low on the priority list for people that aren't living with ADHD to manage every day or any
Yeah.
condition or disability. So yeah, it's tricky, but one day.
Yeah. Yeah, I often think like just, avoiding it because it's awkward, like often just makes it so much worse, right? Like even if you can't do it, like you said, like you can just have a conversation with that person and even that conversation lets that person who needs the accessibility sorts of things
Yeah,
and knows that you kind of value that and that it's safe to have that conversation and that even that goes a long way in itself, right?
yeah,
So it's fascinating, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess in your day-to-day life as a musician, like how do you kind of, you know, uh like walk me through your typical day at work? Like how do you learn to make changes that kind of you know, kind of make your day work a little better and a little bit easier for yourself?
Yeah, I think the master of my own destiny every day is really good. As you say before, Megan, neurodivergent people often love the agency of running their own business or, not necessarily working for the man in some 9 to 5 job. And so that means that every day can be diverse and rich and interesting, especially in the music industry where different projects come and go and the work that you might be working on can vary wildly. So I have some days where I'm waking up and I'm like, okay, today's the day that I'm working on that film score. And I will just only do that. Or I'll only, be preparing for a tour and, setting up all my ambient electronic gear and practicing the piano. And they're like the best days at work where you just get to put yourself in the music. But then there are other days where it's all the stuff, I didn't learn at music school that I've had to teach myself and kind of muddling through, I guess, with a very, very long list, or I should say just multiple lists of different things that help my career to continue to develop over time. And yes, that's the emails and the invoices, the applications and
Yeah, bad statements.
mentoring and things like that. Yeah. And I
Mm.
think I've had to concede that there are some areas of my career where I do need support in order to cope. And some of that comes from the sort of support worker side of things where it's, I have people that will help me manage invoice, doing like bookkeeping, things like that. But also you know, like a virtual assistant type of thing to help with, replying to emails or editing text to get my emails out quicker. Yeah, and I've had to think a lot more about the ergonomics of how I work because I've been diagnosed with POTS in the last few months, and I realized that sitting or standing for long periods of time, it's my ADHD medication will not work if I have brain fog.
Mm.
Yeah.
All the blood has gone down into my legs and away from my brain, and so there's a lot of work I've had to do in trying to structure my working days in a way where I'm supported to make sure I have breaks from the work that I'm doing, and I'm hydrating enough, and I'm eating, and I'm getting circulation around my body, and yeah, there are some parts of my career where that is actually impossible to do on my own without another human, and that's the disability. It's a superpower to be a neurodivergent musician and be able to hyperfocus intensely on composing, an album or something like that. But if you can't remember to eat, drink, answer the phone, answer the
Mm.
door, go to
Go
bed.
to the bathroom.
Yes, actually, the bathroom is one thing that I will still
Ah,
do. But
yeah.
but other than that, everything else, it's like time will stop, and there's no way that especially being an autistic person as well, ADHD medication, that in a way only makes that attention to the project worse, because then I will happily and calmly work on that one project, and it could be 7 hours before I remember that I should probably have a break and stretch out my body, or
Mm.
eat lunch, and it's nearly dinner, and so there's things like that that'll always be hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're challenging, you know. I see this all the time in therapy. I see this in my own life. Like, if your attention is so heavily invested on the task that you're doing, and the task is so stimulating, and you're so focused,
Yeah.
having the focus to even remember to take the break, it's a really tricky problem, and there's no easy solution for that because you can set alarm sort of things, but like it's muscle memory of just switching it off. Like it's so complicated, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I found actually last year I had this really big commission to write. So it was 50 minutes long. And I was interviewing climate scientists about how to cope with climate change. And then it was a piece for a large ensemble of like 16 musicians. And it's using samples of these scientists' voices throughout. So it was incredibly emotionally powerful. So it's the type of project that I would have focused on intensely anyway, except that there was this extra layer of emotion involved. And I had all these musculoskeletal issues. I didn't know that I was hypermobile or had POTS at this point. So I was getting all these, physical symptoms of pain and lightheadedness and stuff through the process, and realizing I really do need to have regular breaks because this is not working. I'm not feeling well. And so I installed a screen timer on my computer, which meant that every hour my screen would just shut off. And so I would be forced to have a break. And it certainly helps in getting me to rest my body. But what I found is that by the end of the day, that was that would be 8 or 10 times where I would be in the middle of some kind of creative idea and then be immediately stopped from finishing it, which was the most dysregulating thing.
Mm.
That by the end of the day, I was so sensitive to sound that I couldn't even handle the sound of my dog's claws on the floorboards, walking around the house. So it's like it solved one problem where my body was in a little bit better shape, but then my mind and my soul was
Yeah.
apart because of those interruptions from the
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, look, Nat, even when you said that, I was like, oh, there's an idea. And I just noticed my whole body go, oh, when you described this, just like, oh, you interrupted me halfway through. Like, yeah, so I can see, like you said, it solves one issue. And now I've got to go back and pick up the threads of what I was doing. And that takes a lot of energy. And oh, yeah. So,
yeah.
And if you can snooze it, you'll just snooze repeatedly.
yeah.
Like I said that
Mm.
almost like a muscle memory thing, like, oh, snooze,
Yeah.
snooze again. So I could, if I put that mechanism in place, I'll never stop at all. And yeah, but then the
Yeah.
end product is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
there's peaks and troughs of neurodiversity,
Yes.
I guess, isn't it?
yeah, but it's an interesting way of looking at it because it allows you to be kinder to yourself in a sense about it because there's part of the benefit of being so focused on something and so invested that you get that benefit, but at the same time not being able to take breaks like that it can be really hard on the body and the mind. But like if you try to like do something to address one, it has an impact on the other. Like these things are complicated, and
Yeah,
like that's okay.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like being aware of that can allow us to be just a bit kinder when we don't always get it right.
yeah. That's right. And I know a lot of neurodivergent people have different perspectives on this, but for me, I really do see my autism and ADHD as a disability because of those complexities in how you try and meet those needs. Because you do need the world to change, or you need extra help in order to manage them effectively. And I'm really happy for those folks that are finding ways for their needs to be met without having to have a human being literally put a sandwich in front of your face in order for you
Yeah.
to notice
Yeah.
that it's time to
But, you know,
but,
yeah, it's so great you've shared it with us today because I think, hearing your projects, your music, things like that, it's the hidden cost, isn't it? So, no, like no one can deny the success of the output and all the rest. I think that could be said of so many people with ADHD and autism, but it's at what cost to yourself. And I think that comes back to that idea of even being identified late. It's that, well, if you're doing inverted commas well, no,
yeah.
people on the outside don't see a problem, but it's like, oh, yeah, but this is what's happening in my body. This is what's happening to my mental health. So, yeah,
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
at what cost?
Yeah, and I think there's a sadness in not knowing these things about ourselves for so long, and
Mm,
that probably by the time that we're seeking a diagnosis, we've cultivated decades of high masking behaviors out in the world, in the workplace. Sort of gives other people the impression that, things are great. And the
mm,
reason why we're seeking a diagnosis is because what's been happening behind closed doors has just become so unmanageable and painful. And yeah, I think it's so hard to articulate. It's so hard to ask for accommodations or changes to people that have only ever seen that masking version of yourself. And musicians, of course, when you go on stage, you're performing to the public. I mean, that's
mm.
the version of masking by default. So people just don't understand that, they might listen to an album I've made. Like, for example, I got this ARIA nomination for an album I made a couple of years ago called Forever Changed, which I made at home. And people might see like the red carpet moment or something like that, but they're not necessarily seeing, the really, really long days and nights where it completely consumed me and put everything else in my life at risk. Um, and that's, yeah, not something that I would ever want to share with the public. But it's also hard to live a life where people don't know the costs that you endure in order to create work for other people to enjoy in out in the world. It's a
Yeah.
And that's why I try and be authentic like this, in forums like this, so people understand just a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, which I think is a really worthwhile thing. It's great to have a conversation about. I guess like one last question to finish up for today. If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, knowing all that you know now, what advice do you think you'd give yourself?
I mean, I'd probably just tell myself that I'm autistic, ADHD, hypermobile, and all the rest of it, just so that hopefully I could jump into learning, learning a little quicker and making some meaningful changes, and I might have avoided years of depression and breaks from my career and the rest of it. But if I wasn't able to tell myself that, I could probably just tell myself like everything's going to be okay. Just don't worry. You'll end up finding a way to live in this world where you are true to yourself, and you can share something with the world that you'll be really proud of, and it's going to be a hard road, and there'll always be things about it that are painful, but it's all going to be okay. Don't worry.
Just a nice thing, a really valid thing for people to kind of think about, right? Yeah, you know it. So where can we find out more about you and like what projects have you got coming up? Very exciting.
Yes. So you can go to natbartsch.com, which is my artist website, and then from there you can learn about different gigs and releases that I have coming up. But the thing I'm most excited about is probably later this year doing some touring of an album called Forever Changed, which is exploring neurodivergent listening needs in music and celebrating the discovery of my true self. And I'm playing some shows in regional New South Wales in July. And then in November, I'm releasing my 10th album, which is this climate change themed album, and it's called Acceptance Does Not Mean Surrender. And it's, going to be a very special thing to share because it's basically just a musical bed to share the knowledge of these incredible climate scientists. Turns out climate scientists are excellent people, and hearing their voices all stitched together, put to music, is a really moving experience.
They both sound like incredibly powerful projects.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. It's really nice chatting to you.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Enjoyed today's episode? Please help us spread the word by liking, subscribing, and sharing on social media. A full transcript of today's episode, along with information about our assessment, therapy, and post-diagnostic services, can be found at our website, beyond-distracted.com. That's beyond-distracted.com. This podcast is intended for educational purposes. For therapeutic advice, please consult a trained and licensed professional.